Okay, let's go ahead and get started here as a few more people are coming into the room. The webinar for today is Proving Your ROI in an Era of Uncertain Funding. And we're happy to have Jeff Finkle here with us in making this presentation. Just some housekeeping before we get started. Please ask questions. There's a chat, or you can click on that and put the chat in there. And also just feel free to put it in the box where you can list that you're in attendance here. We will send out slides and a recording either today or tomorrow. And also, as you put in your questions, we may ask them or respond to them at the time that they're put in, and we may save them for the end, depending on how time is going. For those of you who don't know Chmura, let me just give you a little bit of a background on us. We provide labor market data and analysis to help you grow your community and your business. We really do care about making sure that you have the information you need. We're economists, data scientists, statisticians who really care about excellence and helping you grow your communities. We were founded in 1998. We have offices in Richmond and in Richmond, Virginia. We're driven by your client satisfaction, and our top priority, like I said before, is excellence. We have two sides of our business: software, our JobsEQ software that probably many of you use, as well as our consulting side. And here you see some of the markets that we serve: corporate economic development, education, staffing, site selection, workforce development. And on the consulting side, we do quite a bit of work that covers a wide range of topics, including return on investment, economic impacts, and policy analysis. Here you see some of the organizations that use JobsEQ or Chmura from a consulting point of view, and you probably see some of the top consulting firms in our country that are listed on that list that use JobsEQ. One more item before starting, and we have a complimentary weekly economic update that we put out. It's this 4-page document, and with so much uncertainty in the economy, we encourage you to click on that link when you get it later, or go to our website and go all the way down to the bottom and you could sign up. We look at the data that came out last week, what's to come out the following week. We give you a summary of the information on the second page. The third page, if the Fed is saying anything that's going to move the financial markets or interest rates, we note that. Then on the last page, we give you an interest rate forecast. So please feel free to sign up for that, that we write over the week and then send out on the weekend. So here today, you have myself speaking, and I'll be providing the overall big picture. And we're very happy to be joined by Jeff Finkle. Many of us met Jeff during one of the 35 years or so when he led IEDC. The organization grew significantly under his leadership. When he first started in 1986, they had about nine staff. They had about $900,000 in budget, and they were broke. They merged. He merged with another, brought two membership organizations together in 2001. He had about 18 staff at that time, and he took that organization from, again, one that was not making a profit to one that was. When he left IEDC, they had about 30 people, $6 million in budget, and they were very healthy in terms of the funds and reserves. He was very good in terms of providing content for IEDC and the events. And if you have been to those events, you know that. One of the things that we really enjoyed was the program he created where IEDC would put a team together to help localities diversify and grow regions that went through a disaster. So he established the Economic Recovery Program at IEDC, and we participated in that twice. So he would get a group of economists and other people to go down, strategists, and help. In 2018, we went to Hendry County after Hurricane Irma hit in 2017. And then in 2024, we also joined IEDC in Eastern North Carolina after the disaster there. Jeff, would you like to make any other comments about your background before we jump into the agenda?
Well, I retired in 2022. Off and on, I have followed in Sherry Norick's footsteps. Sherry is raised money and ran some of our programs, and I see her as one of the attendees. That's why I called her out. But I followed her in her footsteps and went to work for the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, in Paris, France. So I've been bopping back and forth, and I also did some work for Ohio University. Then I see there's somebody on here from Marietta, Ohio. So, and by the way, Chris, I'm not going to correct you often, but when you introduced your firm, you didn't mention Cleveland, Ohio. And you know, one of the reasons Chris and I get along so well is we share Ohio in common. I grew up in Ohio, went to school in Ohio, and Chris grew up in the Cleveland area. And I don't know how many brothers you have. It seems like 100 because I keep meeting them and they work for you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Yes, we do have an office in Cleveland and an office in Richmond. And even though there are a lot of Chmuras working here, it's not a family-run business. We have others without the last name of Chmura. But yes, we've had a lot of fun over the years, growing the business to about 60 people now. So that's been great. In terms of our agenda, first, I'll give a big picture overview, and we'll look at what's driving the current administration's policies and then the business actions that follow that. Then Jeff will talk to us about the current funding landscape, and then how to position your organization for success. And then I'll, at the end, give some examples of ROI, what data to track, and how to use it. So beginning with the big picture overview. So you may not like the way that the current administration is carrying out some policies, but let me give you the framework for why it's important that something be done with these issues. So there are 4 issues, really 3 main issues. The trade deficit has been with us for some time. It's too large. Something needs to be done about it. The federal budget deficit has gotten increasingly large, and that needs to be reduced. Immigration reform is something that politicians have been talking about for many decades. Again, something needs to be reformed there. And then productivity, it's always important because productivity leads to efficiencies, that leads to an increased wages, increased standards of living over time. But economics is, well, first, actually, in terms of the trade deficit, we're seeing tariffs being put on other countries. In terms of the federal budget deficit, we're seeing a reduction in funding cuts. We're seeing federal layoffs. Now, some of you may say, well, why didn't we just why didn't we just increase taxes? Or why did we have to keep taxes low? So again, you may not agree with the way the current administration is taking on these challenges, but these are things that need to be addressed. Immigration reform, shutting down the border to illegal immigrants is something that we've seen happen, and that will result in maybe issues with labor availability. And then productivity, as I said, happens over time. But the big thing we're looking at now is the introduction of AI over the past 2 years and how that will affect the economy. And so whenever something happens in the economy, there are always secondary effects and tertiary effects. And think about it like playing billiards. You hit the balls, and you hit the cue ball, and it strikes the different balls that hopefully the 8 ball doesn't go in or the cue ball doesn't go in, but there are secondary effects with hitting those different pool balls. And so that's the same thing that happens in the economy. And so now, because of the things that we're seeing with the current administration's policies, we're seeing other issues such as inflation, possibly from the tariffs. We're seeing interest rate impacts, maybe rates not coming back as fast as we would expect. Stock market went up, stock market came back down, and then it's back up again. The unemployment rate has been down relative to COVID, and wages have been not growing as fast as COVID. But so we'll see impacts of all of these things, and more specifically, you're going to hear from Jeff on some of the secondary and tertiary effects that we may be seeing in economic development because of some of these policies of the current administration. So let's take a look at some historical trends just to really drive home that something did need to be done in these areas. First, you're looking at the trade deficit. So the last 3 or 4 different months, you're seeing a huge increase, and that was due to the tariffs or the expectation that tariffs were going to increase the price of goods. So a lot of consumers, a lot of businesses purchasing in advance some items to avoid those tariffs. So, but the big picture, if you go back to 2021, 23, even back in the 2017 area, we Americans like to consume. And when we consume things from other countries, we purchase them with dollars. And so those other countries have the dollars that they then use to purchase things back from us. And oftentimes, those foreigners will purchase things like land, stocks, and bonds. So on this chart, you're now looking at federal debt as a percent of GDP. And here you could see in about 1950s, 1940s, in the World War era, big increase in debt. Not surprising, expected to happen. However, the latest data for 2024 shows that 99% debt is 99% of GDP. That's very high. And if we look at the forecasts, and this was before the budget that was passed on July 4th passed, you see that the expectation was that GDP debt was going to rise to 122% of GDP in 2034. Now, if we were a third world country, if that were to happen, our dollar would collapse. We're not, and we're one of the best places to invest, but some event could occur. And as I've been giving presentations for over 40 years, people have asked me, when will debt become an issue? And it's really hard to say, when are we going to have that event that causes foreigners and Americans not to want to put their money into treasuries? And then we're going to see interest rates rise and the economy really suffer. Ross Perot, some of you may remember him, ran for president back in the 1980s, and he talked about debt being an issue. He was really 20 years or so ahead of his time. He talked about the hockey stick, but clearly federal debt is an issue that needs to be dealt with. Another issue we have, and it's been around since the 1800s, late 1800s, is immigration. So this chart goes back all the way to 1820, and you can see the increase in immigration over time. You could see in the 1900s the increase that we saw. And in 1924, Congress passed the Immigration Act of National Origins Quota, which meant every country had a certain number of people they could bring in to the U.S. And then once they hit that limit, no longer could people from that country come. My grandmother from Poland, I have a story on that from her family. She made it to the U.S. And her sister wanted to come to the U.S., but we had already hit the national quota for Poland, and we did not for Cuba. So her sister moved to Cuba for a year, and then from Cuba was able to come to the U.S. So in 1965, the origins quota was dropped in favor of immigrants that have relatives in the U.S. or that employers are requesting them because of need. So this goes through 2012. Let's bring that further with some more up-to-date data. This brings you to 2024, and census typically does not estimate illegal immigrants. They have been trying to do that lately, and here you see where they've done that on these slides. In 2024, for example, at the top, the darker blue shows you immigrants coming in because of humanitarian reasons. Then below that, students, then you have temporary migrants, and then you have the permanent migrants. But so clearly, we have seen a huge increase, and something needs to be done about the number of immigrants that are coming into the U.S. We need a policy around it, and that's something that the current administration has done in some way by closing the border to illegal immigrants. But again, we need an overall policy like we saw 2 previous times in the country. And then finally, another thing that's important in the big, broad picture is that we need to see policies that encourage efficiencies and productivity growth. So I showed you the first Trump administration here in this box, and you can see that this is real private. So inflation-adjusted investment in fixed investment, non-residential fixed investment. So things like equipment, like intellectual property, plants and buildings that drive productivity higher. And so we're looking at the end here in 2025, expecting the deregulation, the R&D spending write-offs that now are going to be able to happen again because of the big, beautiful bill. And that should lead to increased living standards and increased wages. So if progress is made, we could see a generational paradigm shift follow. And will it be as significant as we learned when Columbus sailed across the sea that the earth was not flat, but it was round? No, I don't think the shift will be that great, but clearly we could see GDP growing at a faster rate as we go forward over the next few years because of the productivity gains in the economy. So that's a big picture point of view. Again, some would disagree with the way the administration has taken on those frameworks and those issues in the economy. And now, based on all those items, we're turning to Jeff to give us an idea of the current funding landscape.
So, I think if there are two views of the world here, I think Chris is going to be a little bit more optimistic than I will be. And by the way, Regina, I see your comment that we don't call people coming across the border as illegals, the term that is undocumented, and I share that that's the word that we've used in the past. So the funding situation is pretty dire. You can look at almost any agency, but maybe Defense and Homeland Security, and you're going to see enormous cuts. You're going to see cuts in personnel. You're going to see cuts in programs. You're going to see cuts in the way we do business. So let me go through the alphabet soup that is in this slide. USDA, we're going to lose some of the Rural Development Administration programs, and we're going to lose some of their infrastructure dollars. USAID has been cut completely. I believe the number is about 14% of their grant dollars are still going out. And you'll note that former President Bush and former President Obama have pleaded with the administration to get money back out there because there is a belief that we're going to lose millions of lives, and the United States was the number one supporter of international aid, and that losing that can be a global problem, not just a U.S. problem. The VA, it's interesting. I believe the number was they were going to lay off 80,000 employees as of last night. And I don't know what to believe anymore. But as of last night, the administration has announced they're not going to lay off anybody. Now, that also screws up their recent budget that they just passed, because my guess is they built it around a reduction of staffing of 80,000 employees times, you choose a number, $65,000 per job, $70,000 per job on average. It's going to impact some of the dollar amounts that they're been playing with. Canceled grants are going to negatively impact contractors. There's a company called DAI here in Washington, D.C. that have laid off. They were a USAID contractor, laid off 500 employees. If you look at Johns Hopkins University, I believe the number of people that they're laying off because they're losing federal contracts is 2,000 people. And the people in Maryland and are going to be dealing with some of the highest amount of federal employee layoffs, they will also have to be dealing with contractor layoffs, both at NIH and other places within their. University of Maryland is losing a major contract as well. Rural agriculture is being impacted both by tariffs. Countries are stopping purchasing American agricultural products. If you remember the last administration that Trump led, we had to subsidize farmers to the tune of about $23 billion because of the tariffs that were put into place that time. SBA, on top of that, farmers are losing about $2 billion a year from USAID purchases. In addition, the Small Business Administration is cutting back their SCORE program. Sounds like they're cutting some of the SBDC, the Women's Development Centers, and they're tightening up some of their loan underwriting. And where Chris was talking about exports, as you all know, tourism is deemed an export. Well, the current belief is we're going to lose about $12.5 billion in foreign visitor spending. And I was saying hi to Bev Thornton from Alberta. I mean, once we started talking about taking Canada on as our 51st state and diminishing them, Canadians stopped coming to the United States. Not all of them, but enough of them that I'm sure Florida tourism is getting hit hard and border tourism is getting hit hard. But it's not just Canadians that are causing that drop in $12.5 billion in visitor spending. So those are some of the things that we're going to deal with. And then we're going to have other problems that are, and all of this is out of our control. Medicaid, they're cutting the budget by $1 trillion. Now, and I don't know, the Secretary of Treasury was on this weekend and said, well, you're counting on poor people being dumb. They will meet the requirements. Well, if they meet the requirements, then the administration loses their $1 trillion loss or gain that they were hoping that they were going to make up. So I don't quite know how that works. Food stamps, SNAP is going to be cut. Clean energy tax credits are being cut. In the economic development world, we've been talking about for the last several years, how do we grow clusters around clean energy? How do we grow clusters around solar? How do we grow clusters? Well, where the government was supporting the growth of those clusters, we're getting a fair amount of that kicked out from underneath of us in that way. And, and Chris and I had a brief conversation yesterday. There were more than one way to skin this cat about how do you deal with this large budget deficit. And one of the ways was to take a chainsaw to the programs. The other way was not to restore all the tax breaks that existed before, particularly on the wealthy. You're hearing the arguments from both sides of the political spectrum. Chris talking about budget cuts and me talking about let's just not do the tax breaks as great as they were on individuals. We can probably go to our next slide.
Okay. Jeff, one question for you before we go to the next slide. And that, so in economics, everything is scarce and dollars are scarce. So what impact do you think this is going to have on the ability of economic developers to raise funds for their organizations?
So here is, thank you for asking that. I didn't, there are several issues that I think economic developers, particularly the public-private partnerships, but even the public agencies. So if we're going to cut NPR, National Public Radio, and PBS, they're already used to raising local money from businesses and wealthy individuals, and actually average individuals in their community. If they are going to lose the federal support, then they're just going to have to ramp up that ability. If they are going to become a greater competitor in the economic development world for that raising that money. If we're going to have more people that are going to have difficulty getting food, either because of SNAP or the money that would go to food banks or the money that would go to Meals on Wheels, each of those organizations is going to go to the community with their handout. If we're going to have people having difficulty paying for medical bills, hospitals are going to have to come up with more charity care. They're going to be raising money for that. Each and every one of these becomes then a question for the business community or wealthy individuals in your community. Who do they go to? Who do they cut back? Those are all significant issues. In addition, we've heard that the administration, they kind of go back and forth on what they're going to do with FEMA. But let's say, for instance, FEMA no longer exists, and we have a disaster. We just had one this past weekend, a god-awful disaster. If FEMA didn't exist, who is going to pay for the cleanup? Who's going to pay for the infrastructure? Who's going to pay for many of the issues? Now, Texas, one would argue, is probably wealthier than many other states, so they may be able to step in. But they're not going to pay necessarily to the 100-plus families, or hopefully it's not that many families, but it's that many people that have been lost. Who's going to help support those families as they deal with their loss of housing, their loss of health if they survived the storm, or burial costs and other tragic dealings with counseling, etc., if there's no FEMA around. So local governments, state governments are going to have to step in and pay for those things. They may have to pay for food programs out of their own local budgets. Economic developers are going to have to stand and say, we're going to compete against that, ? How? Oh, by the way, you're also going to lose a couple funders that have been growing bigger in the public-private partnership world. Both universities and hospitals have been growing funders, and I would imagine both of them will be stepping back for a variety of reasons. So and I jumped ahead on the last point there. CDBG appears that it is going to survive. I got a note from our friend Phil Singerman, who many of you knew when he was at NIST or when he was at EDA. NIST is going to lose a fair amount of money. And the question is, there's still a fair amount of time left in this calendar year for Congress to play around with budgets. They may have to offset the 80,000 employees at VA. Will they attack some of our other funding sources like CDBG and EDA? That's yet to be found out. Needless to say, this is going to be a very competitive environment, and things aren't going to be normal. What's most likely still safe? I think what's one of the things that is in this bill is opportunity zones. Now, I'm a skeptic on opportunity zones, and I was a skeptic. I worked on enterprise zones. I was at HUD a long time ago and worked on the original enterprise zones. At the end of the day, these programs don't tend to be built around supporting low-income people in low-income neighborhoods. what they end up becoming is tax benefits for developers who locate buildings and build them in low-income neighborhoods, not necessarily with the beneficiary being low-income people. So I'm a little skeptical, but Trump liked it in his last administration, and he has fought for it again this time. Defense spending will increase by $150 billion. Low-income housing tax credit is still going to be there. But I would warn people, defense spending may increase, but if you have a military base in your community and it is not a strong base, meaning that it is essential for the Department of Defense, I think there's a reasonable chance that we will have another round of military base closures. We haven't had one in a while in this administration. There are no sacred cows. And as a result, I believe there's a reasonable chance, as I just said. Thank you. What other emerging funding streams could EDOs explore? And unfortunately, it's not probably going to be at the federal level. And I believe that, IEDC, when I was there, wrote a couple reports on how to go to foundations to look for support. But I think the foundation world is going to be overwhelmed with the amount of need that is going to be out there in terms of poverty alleviation programs, healthcare, food security, dealing with the loss of the United States in the international healthcare, and as a result, it's going to be tough. So I think where we're going to end up in terms of what you're going to be able to go after is going to be state and local government grants. I think the wealthier states may be able to make up some of the difference. The poorer states will not. And I think the only thing we have to hope is that some of the states don't go out and try to create their own Doge programs and go in and burn up some of the areas where local governments may actually need to explore state funding where they would have gone for federal funding in the past. There's also possibilities of private sources. In my era at IEDC, I met one organization, I believe it was in southwestern Pennsylvania, that the Economic Development Organization was actually funded by an individual, the whole kit and caboodle funded by an individual. Now, can we find any of those? Who knows? But I think Chris at some point is going to talk about, how do you improve your branding? How do you tell your story better so that you can put yourself in a good place to chase funding and to prove to your local investors that they need to put money in ED?
Right. Thank you, Jeff. And clearly, yes, I was giving as Jeff said, the big picture of the economy, the more optimistic picture. And as Jeff dove into the economic development agencies, there are parts of this economy, regions in the economy and associations or sectors that are going to have a harder time dealing with some of the cuts that are being made and the changes by the current administration. So how do I position my organization for success? So in these times, you really need to be proactive, you need to be results driven, and you need to both deliver and prove your ROI. So how do I prove the ROI? What kind of data do we need? So what we have here is at the very bottom, this iceberg, but below it, you need to build a data-informed strategy. So you look at the data, but you can't just look at the data. You need to supplement that with stakeholder strategies and engagement. What are you seeing in your region that are your strengths or weaknesses, and how do you build around that? And then second, on the right-hand side, you don't just build a strategy, you have to track it over time. You have to use data to manage the data and track your progress. And then finally, third, you synthesize and market. So how do you tell your story? How do you communicate the ROI? So we're going to give you a little more background and then a couple of examples on doing that. Building a data-informed strategy, how do I prove my value? On the left-hand side, you could look at the overall organizational operations, and you need to come up with strategies with clear, measurable goals. And here I'm going to give you an example of why it's important to do labor shed analysis, how talent pipeline can help you, peer region benchmarking, and then also, on the other hand, it would be helpful to look at specific projects and investments. So here, a feasibility study might be helpful, or economic and fiscal impacts may be helpful to show what your ROI is and how you are contributing to the overall growth of your community and economy. Jeff, do you have any comments on that from your time with IEDC and seeing some different organizations that grow and are able to show their ROI?
You know, the good ones all try hard to show their investors, the politicians, even the media, that investments made in their organization achieves something. And you saw it in a variety of different ways. Some would look at capital investment. Some of them would look at unemployment rates, and some of that moves naturally. Meaning, if the economy is good, capital investment may naturally occur. But what is harder is, what do you influence as an economic development organization? And that's, I think, what you're helping people understand better, Chris, is, if you have economic development as your input, not inflation, not happenstance, what do you get out of the other end of the funnel based on that?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so some examples here. So one is, here's an area in Southwest Virginia. Actually, it's called Go Virginia 1 region, and it's made up of 13 regions with the population of about 368,000. But the point on this slide is that when you're attracting some companies to your region, you can't just stop at the borders. Your labor shed is made up of a larger area. And so here, when we are working in Southwest Virginia, when we're helping them to try to attract firms to their region, the labor shed is a much larger population with 1.2 million. You see it going into 4 different states. And so here, if I'm attracting a firm, I'm showing them that we have skills in people that live here. We have skills in people that live outside the region. So first point is, when you're looking at your strategies, don't limit it to your county. Don't, because of the geography. Certainly you can track data for your county, but when you're trying to attract firms and you're looking at what skills do the community colleges need to teach, you need to look at the broader labor shed. So one point to consider. And then Jeff made the good point that, economies grow naturally. As the economy grows fast, then your economy is moving up. Typically, if the economy is in a downturn, then your region is in a downturn. So some regions have identified benchmarks or have identified other communities to compare itself to. And here you can see in Evansville, Southwest Indiana, where we did some work on benchmarking, and they've created some aspirational peers as well as just peers to track themselves against over time. And then again, as Jeff said, you need to look at these indicators over time and those that I can influence. So population is one that they've looked at. Evansville is in orange, population growth, and in blue are their peers. Notice that they've grown faster than only one of their peers and slower than, in the light blue, the aspirational peers. But they're tracking this because they're trying to make strategies around growing population, in particular, growing the youthful population, the younger population. in some of the things that they're tracking, such as poverty. They've made great progress. In this one, in terms of population growth, progress has not been as great. But again, they have strategies. It's important to make strategies around all of these things you're trying to drive to grow your economy, and then track that over time and adjust your policy, your strategies based on that. And then another thing is, as Jeff mentioned, you want to make sure that your investors and the community know that you're having an impact. And if they don't know what your end goal is, or if they don't see the outcome data that's happening on a quarterly or monthly basis, then they're not sure what the ROI is. So you need to communicate with other people what your economic development funnel is. How many inquiries from new business expansions are there? How many do you expect to see? What's your goal for the year? How many visitors are coming? What their potential job capex is, and customer feedback. If they're not locating in your region, it's really important to find out why, if you can, and to make adjustments based on that. New business announcements. How many jobs and capital how many jobs are being created in capital investment? What are the ripple impacts because of the work of your agency to show your ROI? And then same on the business retention side. How many businesses are you contacting on a monthly or quarterly basis? Are you communicating with higher ed and career technical schools on the type of skills that are needed? And again, what's the prospect and customer feedback on those areas? So then finally, synthesize that information so that you can communicate it. So first thing, who is your audience? And Jeff rightly pointed this out. It may be executives on the internal side. It may be your board of directors that you have to talk to externally. It may be the media. It may be the more general population. So you have to provide papers and infographics that could easily communicate this information. And then another thing to consider is, do you need outside support? So some of you here use JobsEQ. Sometimes we have people that even use JobsEQ that want to use our consulting because they feel it's important to have an unbiased source that is documenting a report. So in closing here, just a few examples, and then we'll open it up to more questions, Q&A. Here's one example that we've worked with some different regions. That is, what are the target industries that you're trying to grow? In this example, we're saying it's computer design firms that on average have 116 people working there, hospitals and physicians' offices, government contractors, and then the number of people that you would expect to grow over the next 3 years, or wherever your time frame is for this strategic plan or this investment cycle that you're trying to work through. So we come up with wages, we come up with the payroll that comes from, if we're successful in our economic development ventures and bringing in these companies, what is that going to look like? And then specifically, how are certain industries in our region going to benefit? So if we're successful in our economic development in this particular region, we're going to bring in because of these 3 different industries we're targeting, about $15 million for the apparel firms. We're going to bring in about $54 million for the grocery stores. So now we can take this to the grocery stores, take it to the retailers and say, this is the kind of growth you could expect if we're successful in our economic development efforts. Will you invest in our firm to make this happen over the next few years? Another example here, so you actually have a company coming to your region, you can look at the ROI. So in this case, we're looking at 266 new jobs coming in, actually 100 direct. The ripple effect makes us 166. We're looking at the construction period. We're looking at over time, what is going to be the cost in terms of the incentives, as well as the increased cost of education and other things to the region, such as safety. And then we could look at the benefit of the taxes coming in, and then you can look at an ROI over time. And in this case, there would be a positive cash flow over about a 3-year period. So this is the kind of analysis that you can do on specific projects coming in to show, again, the impact, the importance of your firm one last example here, and we put this in here on the workforce side, even though many of you are economic developers. So here we're looking at the number of jobs created because of the workforce programs. We're looking at the wages, so how that turns into revenue. And then we look at the cost of bringing the workforce activities, and we come up with an ROI. And here's an example in Northern Virginia and the Hampton Roads, Virginia region of Virginia, where the ROI is 3.9 and 3.8. And here again, an example of putting together a one-page where you could quickly show the impact of your region to hand it out to the stakeholders, politicians, and other investors in your of your organization. So finally, in closing, and then hopefully we'll have some questions here that we could answer. Funding challenges will persist in the near term, and so it's some best practices to mitigate risk. First of all, again, this is only the first round. We may see additional cuts in spending as we go through the next couple of years. As Jeff has pointed out, there's going to be higher competition for the dollars. If we see federal cuts in things like food stamps and FEMA, in other areas where they're going to also start looking for private sector funds. So it's going to be very important to justify your funding. So overall, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act presents a very complex environment for EDOs who are great beneficiaries of federal grants. The bill aims to enhance economic growth through incentives and deregulation, something that I talked about from a broader point of view that will help the economy. But reductions in federal spending and more stringent program requirements will increase competition for limited funds. And the bottom line, strategic adjustments and increasing monitoring of the economic and political environment is really crucial for organizations to be successful at this point. So with that, we do have some time left, and let's go ahead and open it for questions. Jeff, have you seen any questions come in that you would want to try to address?
So far, there's one question probably for you from Ashley. What one tool in Jobs EQ that may be underutilized but brings ROI and economic impact to life?
Well, the economic impact report. So that is, you can go in there and put in for an industry that's going to create either 600 jobs, 200 jobs, 100 jobs, and it will spit out you the indirect and direct, as well as all the different industries that will benefit. So I think that's one that you can use for a couple of different things. One for fundraising based on what your targets are, and secondly, one once you do attract a new firm, to show the impact that's going to have on the economy. And that would be especially helpful as you talk to the press, to show not only is XYZ firm going to create 200 jobs with an average wage of $60,000, but we're going to see the ripple impact create an additional 1.3 jobs for every one direct job. So I would say that would be the biggest one to help from that perspective.
So can we actually hear an attendee, Chris?
No, we can't, but we can see their questions if someone wants to write in a question.
So Ashley asked a question of Sarah Dunnigan about what is radical, hang on a second, was a term Sarah used, radical results sharing. And I just assume that's over communicating, but Sarah, if you could type in an answer to Ashley's question, that would be great.
Yeah, Sarah is great at coining different phrases. So thank you for that, Sarah. And we look forward to seeing your response.
I asked people while you were speaking, Chris, if people could share, what are they expecting to experience, and how are they preparing for that? And I could summarize some of this. Bev Thornton, who comes from Southern Alberta, Canada, She says they're feeling the same influences that I described in terms of what their economic development is going to be about. Sarah said we're building better infrastructure to track our activities, annual outputs, and longer-term outcomes, better data tracking infrastructure processes and procedures. And then that's when she also threw in radical results sharing. And then Bev Thornton added, a positive influence for our region is more tourism dollars staying in Canada. But counter to that, supply chain is disrupted and business expenses have increased or uncertain because they're worried about what is the tariff structure going to be sending goods to the United States. I'm sure that's what she is saying.
Thank you. Good comments.
Yeah.
Right. Have we heard back from Sarah?
Yeah. And I put a couple comments in, which is maybe what Sarah was saying. And one of the issues that I spent a fair amount of time coaching people when I was in my job in terms of people who thought they were in trouble with their boards or thought they were in trouble with their city councils. And there were 2 or 3 commonalities in terms of what was going on with them. And one was, maybe they were a little in over their head. They may have not been great managers. That would have been one. Second, part of being a good manager is understanding what's critical versus what is nice to do. But the other one, I oftentimes saw people who just didn't know how to sell their program. I had one of my friends was in North Dakota, and he always felt like he was on the verge of losing his job. He never did. And at one point he said, I'm doing all this hard work. And I said, yeah, but does your board know it? Do they know what you're doing? Do they know what you're doing with their money? And his communication skills were awful. And this is going to be a time where we're all going to have to figure out how to write better case studies, how to justify what we're doing, not only in terms of an ROI that is analytical, but we're also have to come up with narratives. Not only are we going to have less opportunities to gain money, we're also rolling the dice that these tax breaks that have gone out and these program cuts, that we're going to end up with a better economy, not a lesser economy. But let's say it doesn't work. We're going to really be struggling to make our economic development programs work and eke out a better return for the community that we work for versus another community. And so in every time we entered a down cycle in the economy, I know at IEDC we were preaching to our members, make sure you're doing as much as you can to tell people what they can count on from you and what they were seeing, we're going to see from you.
That's great advice, Jeff. Thank you.
And Sarah did answer. And radical results sharing is internal and external. Asking the questions, is this activity producing results? And if not, we're going to analyze and maybe stop doing it and doing more of what does generate results. Thanks, Sarah. Those are brilliant words.
As always.
And, Sarah has an Ohio background, too. So it's, I think it's in the water, Chris.
Yes, it is. Dayton, I think it is. And good notes here from Melissa. It is important to speak to your critics and also remember that government money is your money and your neighbor's money. So while I realize some of my money may go to things I don't prioritize, I'm going to be tough where I have choices on that. Thanks, Melissa. Okay, well, thank you all very much for participating and for communicating. Jeff, great to have you here with us and to see you again. And thanks so much for your input.
Thank you, Chris, for hosting this. And I want to say hi to many of my friends that I haven't talked to or seen for a while. I saw a number of names and actually shouted out to them in the chat. And I miss seeing all of you, and hope along the way we'll catch up again. So thanks so much, Chris, for including me in this.
You're welcome. And as I said earlier, we'll send out a copy of this presentation as well as the tape recorded results. Great. Have a good day, everyone.